It is an honor to follow Sam Meisels and Leila Gandini in being here to talk about the teacher-child relationship. The teacher-child relationship is the heartbeat where learning begins. It's in the relationship. I'm bringing two thinkers to this discussion today about teachers and children, both of whom are known here in New York City. The first person to help us in our conversation is Vivian Gussin-Paley, whom you know well. And I'm also bringing Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky, who is known here. He was cited in the New York Times 3 weeks ago in helping explain universal pre-K. I met Vygotsky while here in New York in the 1970s, working in a Head Start program in Harlem and studying with Michael Cole at Rockefeller University. Michael Cole and Jerome Bruner, who will be with you tomorrow, were at the forefront of introducing American psychologists and educators to Vygotsky, who quickly became known as the Mozart of psychology. He wrote while living in Moscow in the 1920s and 30s and died as a young man of TB. I met Vygotsky and Mrs. Paley separately, but the moment I met Vivian Paley, I knew that their thinking informed and complemented one another. Vygotsky and Mrs. Paley have provided me with an incredible apprenticeship in learning to teach young children. Today I bring you stories from one morning in a Head Start classroom in Chicago. Along with Mrs. Paley and Vygotsky, we will listen closely to conversations between Mrs. Miller and her 3- and 4-year-old children. As we will listen, we'll see that there's one key to uncovering teacher-child relationships that encourage, inspire, and transform children's lives. The word is pretend. That's it, pretend. The dictionary offers several definitions for pretend: to put oneself forward in some character, to lay claim to aspire to, intend, propose, to venture, to presume, to attempt, to endeavor, to try out. All of these meanings point to children stepping out of the present here and now and stepping into a hypothetical world, a world of new possibilities. When they do so in school, the pretending happens in words, and that provides the cornerstone for all that we hope for in their future. In Mrs. Miller's classroom, we'll examine a unique form of pretend, acting out stories, ones that the teacher reads to the children, as well as stories the children dictate. These activities are taken right from Mrs. Paley's writings. Vygotsky's contribution to the discussion is to help us see that when teachers lead children in acting out stories, teachers stand in that magical, powerful, coveted place of understanding where a child has come from and where they are headed in their future learning. Pretend for a moment that this is what the world is like. When a teacher guides the acting out of stories, he or she stands at that moment between a child's past and their future. With acting out stories, we're looking at an activity that might seem ordinary, unglamorous, an activity that can have a lot of rough edges. The activity, as Vivian Paley offers, requires no materials other than children's literature, paper, and pencil. There are no expensive technology involved, no props, no costumes, no rehearsals. Just a group of children with their teacher sitting around the edge of a rug. Let's see what this looks like, pretending while acting out a story. Mrs. Miller has her 3- and 4-year-old children sitting on the edge of the rug for today's read aloud, Paul Galdon's The 3 Billy Goats Gruff. When she is done, she calls 4 children to the center of the rug to act out the story. The children have been eager listeners and insist on each having a turn to act in the story. To accommodate her 18 children, Mrs. Miller gives 4 children each day a chance to enact the roles of the troll and the billy goats. The children have quickly memorized the words as Mrs. Miller reads the book day after day. Once upon a time, there were 3 billy goats, and the name of all 3 was Gruff. They wanted to go up the hillside to make themselves fat. When the actors are done on this second day of the read aloud and acting, Mrs. Miller asks the children to sit, and she says, "I have a question for you. Why do you think the troll is so mean?" Chantel immediately responds, "His mama dead." Carlos says, "Yeah, she's dead." Mrs. Miller tries to overlook these responses and repeats the question, "But the troll, why is he being so mean to the billy goats?" Daniela says, "She told him to do it." Mrs. Miller now responds directly to this train of thought about the mother. "But there is no mother in the story." Anthony adds, "The father, he's dead too." Lawrence says, "They're both dead." Mrs. Miller said later she was thrown by these comments and felt that the discussion was going nowhere. She asked again, "But there is no mother and no father in the story. How is the troll feeling?" Juan calls out, "Mean." Jose explains, "He's got to fight. His mommy told him to do it." Mrs. Miller makes one last attempt. "How do the billy goats feel about the troll?" Sam asserts, "They're not scared." "Yeah, the little one is," Daniela says. Mrs. Miller says, "Daniela, you think the billy goats are scared, and Sam, you think they're not scared. Do you think they're okay because there are only 3 of them and 1 mean troll?" And the children holler out, "Yeah." Mrs. Miller ends the discussion by saying, "Let's keep thinking about the troll and the billy goats. Right now, it's time for you to pick a good activity." The next day, Mrs. Miller and I met with the other Head Start teacher and the 2 kindergarten teachers to discuss their ongoing experiences with read-alouds, dramatization, and discussion. Mrs. Miller was not eager to report on what she felt was a failed discussion. She told the group about her children's comments regarding the troll. The children kept saying these weird things about the mother and the father. "I don't know why everyone kept saying his mother died, the father died, they both died. Why did they get hooked on this idea? I couldn't get them off it. What am I supposed to do when the children say things that don't make sense?" I, along with the teachers, appreciated Mrs. Miller's dilemma. One teacher suggests, "Remind them what the story says and ask them to think about the words the author gives us." Another teacher comments, "Maybe they're watching too much television, other violent movies." As I listened, I tried to imagine how I would handle the situation. Then I had a powerful memory followed by a surprising thought. I have always loved the story of the 3 billy goats. I am the 3rd of 5 children, and my sister and brother and I turned any table we could into the troll's bridge, and we would act it out. We relished playing that biggest billy goat who got to knock the troll into the river. But suddenly, the story had a whole new meaning to me. The children understood the troll, and I said to the teachers, "Wait, they got it. The children understand the troll. Look what they're saying. The children recognize why anyone would become so wild, mean, and threaten others. He's an orphan. He's homeless. That's why he lives under the bridge. Of course, the troll's mother is dead, and the father. And yes, his mother would tell him to stand up for himself and fight if need be. The troll is protecting the last bit of territory he has left, the space under a bridge. Can you believe what the children have done for us? The professional development time devoted to rethinking this discussion helped us realize that the children had tapped into the story's meaning immediately and in a deep way. It was humbling to recognize how narrow our own thinking as teachers had been in regard to the background knowledge we were prepared to bring to the discussion. We'd been caught up in our individual as well as collective naivete about possible meanings the children might see. Mrs. Miller's experience was an opportunity to remember that the skills in leading a discussion take years to cultivate and always need fine-tuning. When I was a student teacher with Vivian Paley, she coached me in the skills of asking questions and listening to children every single day. She required me to take a group of 8 or 10 children for snack and lead a discussion based on a book or a comment that I heard a child say during the morning activity. It took me months to get the hang of this type of conversational routine. And Vivian Paley wrote the appendix to her book, Wally's Stories, in recognition that the discussion skills she uses are learned skills. They do not simply come to us because of our title as teacher, and they don't necessarily come with a license. Mrs. Miller returned to her children the next day to discuss the troll and the billy goats, and she said, "I've been thinking about what you were saying about the troll yesterday, that his mommy and daddy were dead. Are you saying he's homeless? That's why he's living under the bridge?" And the children's eyes lit up and they said, "Yeah." And they all began talking about the troll and his fighting. Mrs. Miller read the story again, they acted it out, and now she could see it through their eyes. And she had another question ready for discussion. Why does the littlest billy goat cross the bridge first? How did they decide that the littlest one goes first? And this opened the way for the children to discuss brothers. The following day, after another read aloud and dramatization, she asked, "How does the littlest billy goat know to say to the troll, 'Wait for my brother, he's much bigger'? How did he figure that out?" Reading the book, acting it out, and discussing it continued for days. Mrs. Miller and the children were absorbed in a cycle of pretending, wondering, and talking. So what's happening here? What are the field marks of Mrs. Miller's teaching that encourages, inspires, and transforms 3- and 4-year-olds? When we listen to the children in Mrs. Miller's classroom, we see them thinking carefully about the troll. These Head Start children are very much the peers of the children in Vivian Paley's classrooms. The key is, Mrs. Miller is learning to ask questions she wonders about right after the children have had a chance to be immersed inside the story's events and its meaning. They listen to the words and then they try them on. They get inside the characters' shoes and enact their different roles. From 2 days' experience they had had, the children consider the author's meaning and they make a surprising inference about the troll's motivation. They use evidence from the text. They make an interpretation the teacher herself had not considered, let alone a whole group of teachers. The children were already seeing multiple perspectives And in this case, they identified with the troll, the villain in this storybook. And they did not waver from their point of view, even when the teacher was skeptical. The children's participation provides evidence of thinking that is in line with the Common Core state standards. At 3 and 4 years of age, the children demonstrate they can think independently, gather knowledge about people and circumstances, both real and fictional. They comprehend, they value this evidence in the story, and they examine perspectives. Such teaching and learning becomes possible in teacher-child relationships when teachers are given permission, encouragement, and training in these important core basic teaching skills, all 3 of which we have to teach and learn. Now, Vygotsky is sitting on the edge of his seat watching all this. He must have had some inclination for the teaching possibilities Mrs. Paley and now Mrs. Miller demonstrate in order to come up with his remarkable theory. But classroom teaching was not his professional focus. His contribution is a theory, a blueprint for how children learn. Still, I'm sure he could not quite have envisioned such exciting scenes as the scene of the children acting out the 3 billy goats and then discussing the characters. For him, these are dream come true teacher-child relationships. He would say a number of things after he stops jumping up and down with excitement. He might first say, notice that children are not learning on their own. This is not independent learning. They're learning from each other and from their teacher when she gets unstuck. This is not learning that's about the acquisition of knowledge by an individual child, and it's not a child receiving knowledge from the teacher. Every child in Mrs. Miller's classroom was transformed into thoughtful, articulate members of the class. They were listening, contributing to, and catching on to an amazing idea. And it all becomes possible because they get inside ideas together while they pretend. This is what Vygotsky means by the mind developing in society. Vygotsky was intrigued with groups, and he tried to explain the development of the individual in relation to family, school, and community. He described learning as the awakening of a child's potential to new knowledge and skill while interacting with others, both peers and teachers. Gradually, children master achievements as an individual. He describes it's through others that we develop into ourselves. And this is exactly the kind of theory that we need to explain teaching and learning in school settings. School has always been organized for groups of children with a teacher. We keep testing for and trying to explain school learning as if it were the product of a one-way relationship from teacher to child. But we all know that in the presence of good teaching, the equation of learning is much more complex. What happens with other children in the classroom, as well as with the teacher, matters. Each child's learning is everybody's business. In the acting out of stories, we have a chance to see everyone's thinking change, not just one child. And this is going to be why it can be exciting to examine and look closely at. We're going to take a close-up look and see what is this like that everyone changes. We're going back to Mrs. Miller's classroom now, and it's mid-November. And we're going to see her carry out another of Vivian Paley's signature activities. Mrs. Ashford brings her 4-year-old granddaughter, Daniela, into the Head Start classroom. It's Daniela's birthday. She hangs up her coat and hat, and she calls out, "Teacher, I'm going to tell a story about an angel today. My mama say I an angel." Mrs. Miller replies, "Hi, Daniela. Hi, Mrs. Ashford. Come have breakfast, Daniela. Then we'll write down your story." Daniela continues as she sits down. "There are going to be 7 angels in my story. It gotta be girls." Daniela is already anticipating the end of the morning when the class will act out stories that the children have dictated to the teacher. The author can play whichever character she wants in her story, while the teacher offers the invitation to children around the edge of the rug, one after another, to play the other characters. As Vivian Paley discovered, this teaching practice enacts an ethic of inclusion in the classroom. Anyone can play any part in the reenactment of ideas, and they must be given equal opportunity to do so. Here, Daniela is lobbying for special dispensation from the class rule. She envisions a posse of girls, 7 angels. They're in their element like the 12 dancing princesses in the Grimm's fairy tale that Mrs. Miller recently read to them, and they acted out. Now, after finishing breakfast, the children move into playtime in various areas of the room. Mrs. Miller picks up her notebook and calls, "Daniela, I'm ready for that story now. How does your angel story begin?" Daniela runs to the table where Mrs. Miller pulls out 2 chairs. Daniela settles in, her head leaning over the page where her teacher is ready to write each word. She dictates in phrases, her eyes glued to every movement of her teacher's pen, as Mrs. Miller echoes each word as Daniela offers it. "Once upon a time, there were 7 little angels. They lived in a castle. And then the 7 little angels bring their cousin to play. They play with their cousin. They play jump rope and hopscotch. Then they saw their mother. They see their grandpa, their cousin, their uncle. They all have a family angel meeting. They eat popcorn and watch a movie. The end." Daniela heads off to the art table, and she makes a crown out of pipe cleaners. 4 other children dictate stories portraying mothers, babies, dragons, and other characters who face and overcome dangers. Later in the morning, when the class gathers around the edge of the rug, Mrs. Miller announces it's time to act out stories. "Daniela, your story is first." She jumps up, saying to the girls next to her, "Come on, you're in this story. The angels gotta be girls." The girls are on their feet, and very quickly, there's a group in the middle of the rug. One girl is absent today, so the numbers come out right. Mrs. Miller announces there are 7 angels in Daniela's story. Let's count. They do a quick count, and the girls beam, happy to be named an angel. The teacher then calls for a little cousin, the grandpa, and the uncle. She starts with the boy on her right and proceeds around the circle, recruiting actors. "Do you want to be the cousin?" And when she sees a head nod, she says, "Good, come up onto the stage." Pointing to the next child, she says, "Will you be the grandpa, abuelo?" When the child shakes his head no, she moves to the next child. Recruiting a mother is a little harder. Several boys don't want that role. Mrs. Miller accepts no thank you and points to the next child to see if he would like the part. He agrees, and I think it's because being a part of this growing cast of characters is more appealing than sitting on the sidelines. There are 15 children present in school that day, and 11 are acting in the story. The rug is crowded with angels floating about, pretending to jump rope, play hopscotch with the mother, and then Grandpa uncle, and cousin join the celebration as Mrs. Miller narrates the little story and they act out their parts. Now, Vygotsky and Mrs. Paley agree on several things that we can see about this teacher-child relationship between Mrs. Miller and Daniela and the class. Daniela's story begins with a personal image of happiness, but its dramatization at group time gives it new significance. The gathering of children on the rug is the affirmation of a new meaning that her story can have in school. In the storytelling and story acting, children and teachers come together as a community in ways that complement, reinforce, and expand a child's personal fantasies. Eating popcorn and watching a movie together in this pretend story spells togetherness, friendship, and comfort. Those meanings are in the story, and now they are in the classroom among the children. Daniela's story has many origins. It comes from the teacher's invitation to each and every child to tell her the story that the class can then act out. Mrs. Paley describes her unwritten contract with the children about these activities. She says, and I quote from The Boy Who Would Be a Helicopter, "Let me study your play and figure out how play helps you solve your problems. Play contains your questions, and I must know what questions you are asking before mine will be useful. But today I would add," she says, "put your play into formal narratives, and I will help you and your classmates listen to one another. In this way, you will build a literature of images and themes, of beginnings and endings, of references and allusions. You must invent your own literature if you are to connect your ideas to those of others." In Daniela's story, we watch a 4-year-old child generate a story of celebration on her birthday. She has heard the teacher read stories and has well internalized the literary protocol. Once upon a time, there were 7 little angels. She knows the voice of being an author. Vygotsky watches Daniela's confidence in dictating the story and notes how every child gets a chance to appropriate her disposition and eloquent language as they participate in her script, just as they do with the stories Mrs. Miller reads to them. I quote now from Vygotsky in Mind and Society, "Strict subordination to others' rules is quite impossible in day-to-day life, but in play, it becomes possible. Play creates a zone of proximal development of the child. In play, a child always behaves above his average age, above his daily behavior. In play, it is as though the child were a head taller than himself. As in the focus of a magnifying glass, play contains all the developmental tendencies in a condensed form, and it itself is a major source of development." So we watch Daniela surge forward in her dictated story, this burst of creativity that takes everyone with her as she narrates and as Mrs. Miller guides the children in enacting the scene. Daniela pretends in her daily play and in her dictated story. Long before she can write, she can take an idea, formulate it into a narrative, dictate it to her teacher, and eagerly engage her peers in stepping inside thinking for a moment. At ages 3 and 4, our children come into our classrooms filled with stories to tell if we invite them to do so. When Mrs. Miller does, she provides the entree for teacher and children to enter thinking that is both individual and collective. Vygotsky would say that the opportunity for Daniela and her classmates to dictate and act out stories with each other enacts the goals of schooling. The children are being inducted into a literary community where they experience the power of both connecting with and expanding each other's thinking through words alone. And that's what makes story acting so remarkable. The activity involves the child, every child, using symbols alone, words that are spoken, written, and enacted in a logical, abstract, and rule-governed way. Now, Vygotsky and Mrs. Paley have only watched about 6 minutes of the school day so far. There's several more stories that were told that morning. When Daniela finished her angel story, Maria jumps in, excited with her emerging English skills, and she goes like this, "Maestra, me a story, me a story." Her hands shaking as if to illustrate words that are hungry to spill forth. Maria has been playing in the doll corner next to the table where Daniela had just sat dictating her angel story. Mrs. Miller offers her the chair that Daniela has just left, and Maria tells Jose to come along, her best friend. He is always the father in their doll corner play. She blurts out words in a rush of excitement while watching Jose's face, and watches and monitors then what Mrs. Miller writes. The dragon, the baby, the dad. The dragon eat the baby for lunch. The mother rescue the baby. The father trap the dragon. The baby, the mother go by the house. Maria and Jose are smiling, and they head right back to continue their story in Spanish in the doll corner. Maria's story shows us that storytelling and story acting are a curriculum in words, in vocabulary development. The activities hand teachers the very opportunity we want, the chance to stimulate and inspire and encourage words. Our number one job as teacher is to cultivate children's language skills, knowledge of spoken and written word, and the power they have to transform our understanding of what we see, think, and do. Maria is driven with the urge to speak. She pushes beyond her own insecurities in a new language to put her image of dragon and baby into words for her best friend Jose and for her teacher to bring to her classmates. And both matter now to the teacher and to Maria, the friendship and the whole group. Vygotsky reminds us words are not an accumulation of vocabulary that a child gathers up like in a backpack and then uses. Word meaning is not in the word, and it's not in a person. Meaning is in a relationship. It's in the air like a magnet, pulling people together in understanding. Word meanings are always changing and growing with each use and in each new situation. It emerges and lives in a relationship. In the storytelling and story acting relationship, the invitation to pretend provides teacher and children the chance to speak and work hard to understand each other and to do so with respect. The words in stories shape and then transform relationships. Now, Chantel has been cooking up a storm in the doll corner, and she says in a pushy voice to Maria, "Don't touch that baby, she's sleeping. I gotta take her to the doctor. She needs a shot." Mrs. Miller asked Chantel, "Do you have a story about your baby that you want to tell we can act out later?" Chantel says, "I got another story to tell. Maria, make sure you don't wake her. She'd be crying all night. Chantel joins Mrs. Miller at the table and launches in, pausing after each sentence while Mrs. Miller writes. Little Red Riding Hood was in the woods going to Grandma's house. The wolf trying to eat her up. He wants the food. Mrs. Miller says, Chantel, this is almost the exact same story you told a week ago. Listen. Mrs. Miller flips back through the pages of her notebook and finds Chantel's story from a week ago. Look, here in my notebook it says, Chantel's story. This is from last Wednesday. Here's what you wrote. Little Red Riding Hood, and she went to her grandma. The big bad wolf is trying to eat her. He wanted the food. You're thinking a lot about that story. Chantel replies, yeah, the wolf, he not gonna get it. I'm gonna cook more food. And she goes off to the doll corner once again. Later, Mrs. Miller and I discussed the continuity in Chantel's narrative line of dictated stories. Only in her dictated stories does her thinking about the fairy tale characters come out that Mrs. Miller reads. Only in dictation does that come into the conversation. 2 weeks ago, she wrote another one that reads, Little Red Riding Hood, the big bad wolf comes, she go to her grandma's house. 1 week in the future, from the one she had dictated this one day, she was going to tell this next story. The wolf says, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down. Little Red Riding Hood said, I'll go to my grandma's house. No, I mean my house. So 4 weeks in a row, Chantel thinks about the key ideas of this story, considering the choices and the decisions of the young protagonist facing danger. She explains the wolf's character in the last story with the lines from the Three Little Pigs. So Chantel can sustain a storyline with peers in the classroom in her play, with her teachers and classmates in a dictated story, and in her mind, she's clearly highly tuned to the storylines her teacher is offering in the daily read-alouds. Chantel is a source of creative power and thinking in all of these community contexts as listener, storyteller, story actor, and a peer in play. Vivian Paley said, at Lady Bird Johnson's 100th birthday celebration exactly 2 years ago, she wrote this in a letter to me, that she said this, we have no more important natural resource than our children, and they have no more important resource than their imaginations. Vygotsky describes the emergence of imagination in children that happens somewhere about 2.5 to 3 years of age as a breakthrough to a new form of thinking, to consider the possibility of a situation, a person, a set of actions that do not exist in the immediate here and now. Vygotsky says, imagination is a new psychological process for the child. It's not present in the consciousness of infants and toddlers. It is totally absent in animals, and it represents a specifically human form of conscious activity. The imagination, as it can burst forth in pretend play of preschoolers and in their dictated stories, heralds a new era of human development, and it separates preschoolers from infants and toddlers. This is what educators seem to value, for example, in the Common Core state standards, but we seem unsure of how to capture it and harness it. Too quickly, educators are drawn to facts, skills, before we turn to thinking, which sometimes we delay for years until reading and writing skills are fully developed. But in opting to delay or even silence the development of children's imagination, and if we only focus on skill learning, we stunt literacy development and school learning. Now, in the next story, we're going to see an older child help a younger one, as well as this older child help the teacher, all inside of a pretend story. 4-year-old Carlos is playing with 3-year-old Pablo in the block area with plastic dinosaurs that come in 4 and 6-inch sizes. Carlos places the large dinosaurs in 2 lines facing each other in a formation for a battle. Little 3-year-old Pablo sits silently next to him and puts the accompanying baby on the back of each one of the larger animals. Both boys balance their animals with great care and precision so that the pairing of animals is exact. Carlos is ready for the teacher when she comes by and says, "Do you have a story you want me to write down?" And he launches right in. The dinosaurs were playing on the grass. Then a big giant dinosaur came and scared all the dinosaurs away. And then the big dinosaur, he opens his mouth and he eats all the monsters. The big monster dies. Now, Pablo has been sitting, staring quietly, his eyes wide open, watching Carlos. He speaks mostly Spanish. He and Carlos go back to their play while the teacher observes for a moment. She's ready to call for cleanup time and is about to get up when Pablo suddenly says, "Maestra, mine." He points to the animals and starts talking excitedly in Spanish. Mrs. Miller has some rudimentary Spanish, but is not sure she can catch the details. So she looks up for Mrs. Ortiz, the bilingual assistant, who was busy with a group of children finishing a puzzle. In that one moment pause, Carlos jumps in and says, "I'll help." He's fully bilingual and has been immersed in the dinosaur play with Pablo, so he's a great choice. He's ready to translate. Pablo dictates in a quiet and yet excited voice to Carlos. He stares at Carlos as he does so. Carlos immediately translates to the teacher into English, and then both boys watch their teacher as she echoes and writes each word. And so if you can imagine the table with these 2 boys watching this piece of paper. What Carlos translates is, "The robot carry the baby. Then they fight, the dragon and the baby." The teacher rereads these 2 sentences in English, asks Carlos to translate them into Spanish for Pablo, and there's a big smile on Pablo's face. Then Mrs. Miller asks, "Does the baby fight too?" Carlos talks with Pablo. They exchange a few quick comments, and Carlos says, "The robot fights the dragon, and the baby helps the robot." Mrs. Miller replies, "Great work, boys. We'll act these out in a few minutes." "Carlos, thank you for helping Pablo and me write down the story." And she goes on to call for cleanup. In this scene, 4-year-old Carlos is helping 3-year-old Pablo and the teacher. Vygotsky says this is the supreme example of the give and take of help, when the teacher-child relationship remains open to help from others. Carlos is exquisitely attuned to everyone in this community, and he brings his bilingual proficiencies to help a robot that is protecting a baby from a fierce dragon. Where do these children come up with their stories? I wrote a letter to Vivian Paley describing these stories I was hearing from children and that morning in the classroom. She wrote back, "What, we might ask, has made us so dissatisfied with our children's original contributions to human development as to wish to skip over original, and move to the next stage of skill building. We want our little children to know what is already known, and we as a society are no longer even curious to see what the children bring with them and what they're trying to tell us and each other. Each of us teachers can listen to what our children bring with them when they begin school and treasure their very human beginnings. There's one last story that was told that November morning. Anthony has been building an elaborate block structure near Carlos and Pablo. He stops suddenly when he hears the cleanup song. He looks silently and his eyes fill with tears. He dreads the end of activity time. Anthony has remarkable visual sensibilities. He points to his 2-story block building with ramps and towers, and he says with a whimper, "My story." As a visiting teacher, I ask, "What are the words to your story?" He says, "I build a house for cars." He watches me write down those words in a notebook I'm carrying, and I look at him and say, "We have to help clean up." He nods his head ever so slightly and sadly, taking the first block off the building. Children begin to come to the rug. We all help Anthony dismantle his structure to make room for the group. Carlos and Pablo have their dinosaurs in their hands and they push blocks toward the shelf where the children scramble to put them away. Now, each of these little stories takes no more than a minute to act out, as the children know the pace and the paces of stepping on and off their stage in the center of the rug. Mrs. Miller reads Anthony's stories first to help him over this difficult transition. She reads the one sentence while Anthony pretends to build with blocks. The children are familiar with his beautiful block structures, and many saw the one that was on the rug just a few short minutes ago. Maria's story was the last that was acted out. The school day ends with one of the oldest storylines, the prince killing a dragon and the mother taking care of her baby. Her image is familiar, happy, and reassuring. The children are ready for snack and then going home with parents who are about to arrive. What have the children learned in these activities? And why is dramatization important and necessary in this school day? Mrs. Paley's methods of dramatizing stories exemplify the mechanism in learning that Vygotsky envisioned as guiding development. In the dramatization of the children's stories, we watch the children take the experiences they're having and learn to put them into words. This transforms their experience into an abstraction, a dramatized scene that can be examined by others, revised, and expanded over time. When the children's own narratives are dramatized alongside those the teacher offers, the children become apprentices to every aspect of the literary enterprise. They search for words to explain the images in their mind. They draft ideas. They listen and experiment. They revise their thinking daily with help from others. On this November day, 6 children, 1/3 of the class, has the chance to dictate a story. All 18 children were actors in the various stories. They're learning that their own ideas and those from books that are being read to them hold new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. This world of new ideas is coming through a process of education that is intimate, creative, and personal for each child, for the teacher, and for the class. The children grow committed to what school has to offer because there is a dialogue between what they think and what others around them are thinking. Children are willing partners in the educational enterprise because it becomes a dialogue among friends, not a monologue of teacher to student. dictating a story, children have to learn how to discipline this swarm of thoughts, images, interests, and needs that crowd into their minds in any one moment. Anthony, who is not very talkative, finds dictating a story about his car garage some consolation in the disruptive moment of cleanup. Chantel cannot stop thinking about Little Red Riding Hood, and she can bring to the group her revised draft of the scene where Little Red Riding Hood meets the problem as often as Chantel needs to rethink it. Her classmates and teacher are happy to examine what it looks like and play it out one more time in its varying nuances. Children are ready to discuss and explain their choices in an unfolding narrative. They understand the purpose of clarifying questions about who does what in order to render stage directions. Dramatizing stories of dinosaur battles and crying babies at the end of a morning or afternoon of school might sound good in theory, but it leaves the teacher trying to keep a large group of hungry, tired, restless children focused. Why do this? Why should a teacher push ahead with story dramatization at such times? Is it really that important? I've had plenty of experiences leading dramatization of stories where children get excited, difficult to control, and hard to contain. There were lots of times when Mrs. Miller had to give reminders of no touching and quickly bring a lively, rambunctious group of children to order after the third billy goat knocks the troll into the river with his 4 hard hooves. Why would any teacher eagerly look forward to this activity? You might say, invite trouble. The answer is because children love it so intensely, but they also benefit from it. If I had not read Vygotsky and only knew Vivian Paley, I would have said, okay, Vivian Paley is an extraordinarily gifted teacher, and this is her thing. Theater is her particular form of teaching expertise. I can appreciate what she's doing, but I'm going to leave that part to her and just do what's comfortable for me. Vivian Paley reminds us, though, in Wally's stories, that dictation is a nice activity to offer in preschool and kindergarten, but a few children, and mostly girls, will participate in the invitation to dictate. But why does dictation draw all the children, particularly boys, if dramatization is included? This is where Vygotsky can help clarify the work of teaching and learning. In Russian, there is one word that indicates teaching and learning. As English speakers, it's hard to imagine what this might mean, to have only one word that holds out this opportunity for reciprocity in one verb. Dramatization of stories is an activity that exemplifies such reciprocity in a teacher-child relationship. It is an activity that exemplifies the give and take among friends in a space of potential learning, the space of children's potential. As we see in Mrs. Miller's classroom, dramatization offers children the incentive to listen to each other and to what the teacher is presenting, and they listen to their own stream of thought. So then we're left with confronting the challenges the activity poses for teachers and learning the skills involved. Without Vygotsky, it would have never occurred to me that as teacher educators, we need to uncover what's going on in dramatization and learn the skills to carry it out. As in all areas of teaching, effective skills need modeling and then practice. Teachers can grow more effective over months and even years with coaching and conversation about what is going on. I wrote to Mrs. Paley to describe challenges I was having with leading dramatization of children's stories, and she responded in a letter with detailed notes on exactly what's happening in learning and how to learn to do this. So I quote from a letter. "I'm happy to discuss the important issue you bring up, the difficulty teachers can have in dramatizing children's stories. As with any activity, if it does not yield easily to children's management, go back and start with earlier, logically easier formats." What is this simple format which I write? It is the acting out of very easy books and scenes. My own kindergartners were quite used to dramatizing books like The Carrot Seed, The Three Billy Goats Gruff, much easier books, and doing it in choral style. We practiced acting out scenes from books, going around the rug, giving pairs of children small scenes to act out with specific directions from me. Given a certain kind of restless kindergarten, this worked, and I would do the same with older children. In other words, create exercises, including scenes the teacher makes up. There's no reason for a teacher to allow story acting to get out of hand, or block play or doll corner play to fall apart. If a group appears overly excited when acting out a story, then the activity must be reduced to some basic skills inside of basic stories. Sample directions. This was a long letter. The teacher says, "I have noticed that our story acting goes best when there are 3 actors on the stage. Today we're going to act out a story from last year's kindergarten with 3 actors. We'll go around the rug giving every group of 3 children a chance to act." The bunny walked slowly in the woods, looking all around for an adventure. It saw a little bear who was lost. "I'll help you find your cave." They walked and walked until they found Big Bear eating blueberries. "Oh, good, here's your lost cub." "Thank you," says the mother. If a teacher feels like it's a good idea, every day before storytelling and story acting, the teacher can create a little story for children to act out, creating very specific acting rules. If in the doll corner a baby is being tossed around, we do not need to yell, "Naughty child." We do need to practice putting the baby to sleep, playing with the baby, seeing if the baby is hungry. Teachers must break down good play and good storytelling and story acting in scenes to be practiced. Mrs. Paley opens the way for novices and those of us with more experience to see where skilled practice comes from, not only in dramatization, but in the monitoring of good activity in all areas of the classroom throughout the school day. She helps us watch how teachers can meet the imagination of children in play and storytelling and story acting with a vision of her teaching goal, well-acted scenes of all kinds. She sets out a curricular path in pretend for teachers and student teachers to copy and practice. One last scene. It's the last day of school now in Mrs. Miller's classroom. Play and storytelling are coming to an end. Anthony sits quietly building with blocks. Edith, who hardly ever speaks in school, was sitting silently next to him building with blocks, absorbed, watching him place each block carefully. It was a rare moment of interaction between 2 of the quietest children in the classroom. Anthony speaks with his hands every day, and the class sees and admires his artistic skill. Edith assists Anthony for about 10 minutes and then needs to use the washroom. Anthony continues building. Anthony had not signed up to tell a story that day, but since he was there, I asked him if he'd like to tell a story. He nodded yes. He moved close to the notebook, to watch me write the words, "Batman, take the treasure. Batman, open the treasure and get the money. Batman shared the treasure with Robin. Batman said, take the treasure, there won't be any more." Carlos is playing with dinosaurs again across the rug. I saw Carlos look up when Anthony mentioned Batman. Carlos listened for a moment and then went back to the dinosaurs. This is now a finely tuned community, sensitive to story content in dictation and play. Both Carlos and Anthony offer a great deal to other children, one verbally and one visually, but both are giving nonetheless. The last story of the school year would come from Edith. She's a tiny, thin child who moves around the classroom like a shadow, rarely talking and rarely telling a story. During the whole school year, she told 4 stories. Now, she had just come back from the washroom and was sitting behind me at a table. I hadn't even noticed her return. Mrs. Miller gives the 5-minute warning. Edith taps me on the shoulder and says, "I have a story." And I say, "Great, there's just enough time." Her 4 stories came, one in December, one in January, one in April, and now this last day. This is where she began in December. It was mostly nouns. A baby girl, a baby mommy, a daddy, baby mama, baby son, baby daughter, baby walking stick, baby stroller, the baby's sleep, daughter wake, daughter sleeping, daughter wake, mommy wake. Edith seems to be saying, in the beginning, there are mommies and babies. Even the mommies were once a baby. Life in the beginning is sleeping and waking. In June, on this final day, her story is a full-blown plot. Her opening line shocks me. Her narrative seems to jump out into the present, fully developed as that of her peers in the classroom, all the other 4-year-olds. Listen to this. A princess grabbed the monster's neck. The monster run away and locks the door. The princess run out, and the monster come right back to the girl's house, and the girl said, "Get out." She said this louder than anything she had said this year. The princess run away to the mama's house. The monster grabs the grandma's house and throw it on the grandpa's house. The monster run away and go in the grandpa's house. When the group acted out Edith's story, her narrative was well in stride alongside the others. She has been listening quietly all year, working things out in her own mind, observing everyone and everything going on around her. This tiny wisp of a child who rarely speaks provided the finale to that school year. Edith's story is a tale of a princess and a monster who each dare to speak out and act in bold, defiant ways. The princess and the monster both set clear boundaries and seek safety in a grandparent's house. Edith, like several of her classmates, had a number of unbearable hardships in her young life. And yet she enters into school learning fully alongside her peers. When her teacher asks, "What story do you have to tell? How does it go?" Let's see what it looks like when we act it out. When storytelling and story acting are a part of the curriculum, children listen to what others have to say and offer new ideas to the community, a literary one. The children are now sitting around the snack table eating fruit and crackers during the last 5 minutes of Head Start. Carlos and Edith are at the same table. Edith whispers to me, "I have another story to tell." I told her, "I know you have lots more. I hope you keep telling stories in kindergarten." I swallow, knowing there is no time left for one more story. I fear that Edith may go for years with no teacher asking her what story she has to tell. There is sadness that all of the children in Mrs. Miller's classroom will never see each other again, or their teacher, or even that school. It is policy in Chicago public schools that they go on to, quote, designated neighborhood schools. After a pause, Carlos looks up, eating his orange slice, and says, "I want to grow up to be a teacher." Vygotsky, Mrs. Paley, and Mrs. Miller, and all of us can only hope that he does. He exemplifies the excitement, the interest, the attentiveness, and the generosity that goes with listening to everyone's story and considering what it has to offer everyone's learning. Teacher-child relationships that encourage, inspire, and transform begin with pretend. May the school days ahead of you be filled with you and your children both saying, "Pretend that." Thank you.